Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 2022 Solutions for Congested Corridors Program Workshop. I am Naveen Habib. I manage this program. I want to go ahead and wait for a few more people to join on. I know it's only 1:01, so I'm going to give it another minute or two just to allow people to log on to the meeting and the workshop. And then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, I see that attendees are still trickling in. It's 1:02. We do have a lot to get through today, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, good afternoon. Welcome to the 2022 Solutions for Congested Corridors Program Workshop. I am Naveen Habib. I manage this program, and I am joined today by Matthew Yoscott, who is the Deputy Director of SB1 Programming, to cover today's workshop. We also have additional members of our team joining us today to help moderate this workshop. This includes Kayla Giese, Celeste Acewes, and Cherry Zamora. In these workshops, we plan to review and amend program guidelines to prepare for the next program cycle, which is cycle 3. These guidelines govern how the program will be implemented, facilitated, and reported on, as well as how funds will be distributed to reimburse agencies for expenditures. You will hear us refer to the program interchangeably as program and SCCP throughout the course of this workshop. As a reminder, anytime we do state we or us, we are referring to Commission staff. And finally, as a reminder, since we are discussing proposed changes to guidelines, all proposed changes or recommendations to the guidelines can be seen in bold yellow font on the corresponding slides in today's workshop. Now, before we get started, I will share a quick refresher about the program. Kayla, if we can move to the next slide. So the Solutions for Congested Corridors program was established in 2017's landmark legislation, Senate Bill 1. $250 million are appropriated annually from the state highway account to provide funding to regional transportation planning agencies, county transportation commissions, and Caltrans to reduce congestion throughout the state. The program is currently on its second cycle, covering fiscal years 2021 to 22 to 2022-23. With 7 projects programmed for $500 million in funding and total project costs valued at $2.6 billion. And with that, let's move on to some housekeeping items. Kayla, take it away and walk us through the GoToWebinar logistics.
Thanks, Naveen. Can you hear me? Cool, thank you. Our workshops normally take place in different locations around the state. However, containment measures surrounding COVID-19 have required us to adjust to a webinar format. Please bear with us should we encounter any technical challenges. The workshop agenda is located under the Handouts tab and can be downloaded and saved during the webinar. It can also be found on the Commission's website. For participants joining us through GoToWebinar, please find the webinar panel located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the audio, question, and handout tabs. Under the audio tab, you have the choice to listen in via the computer or telephone option. If you prefer computer audio, please select the appropriate box. If you prefer the phone call option, select the corresponding box and dial the phone number, access code, and audio PIN as directed by the automated system. Please note that if the audio PIN is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak should you have a comment. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These cannot be shared with other participants as they are registered to a specific attendee. We welcome comments and questions from attendees as a part of each topic at this workshop. There will also be an opportunity for comments and questions at the end of the presentation. There are 2 options for participants to provide comments. You may click on the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Also, please use the raise hand feature as early into the topic as you can to give the system time to acknowledge you. You may also use the questions tab to submit a question or comment. Please type in the topic you are commenting on and your comment. Commission staff will read the comment on your behalf. You will not be able to be on camera while making comments. Thank you for joining us today. Back to you, Naveen.
Thank you, Kayla. Alrighty, so if you have joined us previously, you may be aware that agendas are posted up to 10 calendar days in advance of each workshop. Presentations and recordings are posted after each workshop, and we email any key decisions made during a workshop to all attendees following that workshop. We will make recommendations based on the consensus reached throughout roughly 2 workshops. For timeliness, additional time on any topic might be limited to ensure all scheduled topics are covered during the allotted time for any given workshop. Similarly, previously covered topics may not be readdressed at subsequent workshops unless determined absolutely necessary. Finally, a reminder to all attendees, if you plan to make a comment or ask a question, please clearly state your name and your organization's name. You may raise your hand or add a comment at any point during our presentation, and we will ensure all comments are addressed as received. On to the next slide. So in our previous workshops, which took place on September 28th and October 29th, respectively, we covered, next slide, please, lessons learned from the previous 2 program cycles, the proposed program schedule for cycle 3, an overview of proposed technical changes to draft guidelines, funding restrictions, and changes to the land use efficiency evaluation criterion. In the next 2 slides, I will share high-level discussion highlights on pending proposals that we plan to discuss further in our 2022 workshops. So this next slide is one of these outstanding proposals, was to determine the length of the next program cycle. Since its inception, the program has programmed 2 funding cycles. The first cycle covered 4 years of programming with $1 billion in SCCP funds and included fiscal years from 2017-18 to 2020-21. The current cycle is the second cycle, which covers 2 years of programming with $500 million in SCCP funds and includes fiscal years 2021-22 and 2022-23. For this upcoming third cycle, we recommended a 2-year program period, but highlighted additional program options for discussion purposes. Based on the feedback we have received on this proposal, early consensus indicated support for the 2- and 4-year program cycles, which may allow SCCP cycles to sync with other commission programs. The main concern about a longer program cycle was that it may preclude competition and project diversity. There was also a suggestion to consider hybrid funding cycles like the Active Transportation Program, also known as ATP. The main concern here was that the funding split in overlapping cycles may reduce the total amount available for allocation in those years. In the next 3 slides, I will cover proposals where we did reach a consensus during our previous workshops. So thank you. First is the change under eligible projects in the 2020 SCCP guidelines. We will add clarifying language to factor in performance optimization measures of SCCP funded equipment without requiring additional justification. This change will also allow increased consideration of technology-based and/or technology-inclusive projects to future-proof SCCP funded projects and project segments. For your viewing convenience, we have provided the current and proposed language in the same place on this slide. As I mentioned before, the gold or yellow color is what is being proposed on the slide. On this next slide, the next change incorporates CAPTI Strategy 1.1, which recommends prioritizing SCCP projects that enable travelers to opt out of congestion. We presented 3 separate options to initiate the discussion to incorporate this strategy into the SCCP guidelines. We did not have any preferences on any of the options that were presented. Consensus indicated support for the proposed language change that you see on the left side of this slide, which was derived directly from the CAPTI strategy itself. I will not read aloud the entire paragraph, but please note that the language about vehicle miles reducing projects being better prioritized here is not intended to provide those projects with an increased evaluated credit. Instead, it's meant to demonstrate that should projects compete equally through all of the evaluation criteria and arrive at the same or very similar ratings, the project that is deemed to reduce vehicle miles traveled would be prioritized for funding. And the last proposed change is on the next slide. and this incorporates CAPTI Strategy 1.2, which promotes innovative sustainable transportation solutions in the SCCP by requiring that all projects be part of a multimodal plan or CMCP, consistent with the Commission's comprehensive multimodal corridor plan guidelines, as adopted by the Commission in December 2018. This resulting change will remove the reference to existing plans, updated plans, hybrid plans, and new plans from the SCCP guidelines in Cycle 3. We understand that there may be some nuances to what this means for specific types of new plans, and we are willing to work with any agency on those nuances accordingly. So this concludes the recap of the last 3 workshops, which took place in September, October, and November of 2021, respectively. I will now ask Matthew Yoscott, who is joined by Associate Deputy Director of Equity and Engagement, Sequoia Erasmus, to join us to provide a recap of the All SB1 Competitive Programs Workshop on Incorporating Transportation Equity, which took place in December 2021. Matthew, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Naveen. And I'll be presenting the next couple of slides. So thanks for the introduction. So as Naveen mentioned, back on December 16th, we hosted a program workshop on better incorporating transportation equity into the SB1 program guidelines. So that's not just for the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, which we're discussing today, but that also encompassed the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, as well as the Local Partnership Program. I'll point out that if you were unable to attend that workshop, we've very recently gotten a recording of that workshop posted to our Commission's workshops website, so please refer to that link and recording in case you missed the December 16th workshop. During the workshops, as Naveen mentioned, Sequoia Erasmus, the Associate Deputy Director of Equity and Engagement at the Commission, explored some key areas with attendees, and I'm going to recap some of that feedback today. Workshop attendees shared feedback on how they would meaningfully consider transportation equity in the SB1 programs, which included encouraging early community participation in the planning process, adding community support as a criteria, and keeping the approach simple. During the workshop, we did utilize Slido, which is an online tool to anonymously solicit feedback in order to learn how some organizations and our partners would incorporate equity into their own programs, projects, and metrics. Overall, workshop participants were in favor of a mixed approach to incorporate equity throughout the guidelines where applicable, in addition to a standalone section as it would be applicable. We also heard consensus around the idea that flexibility in defining vulnerable communities within project applications was viewed as a positive thing. This slide and the next slide are just some of the high-level takeaways from the December 16th workshop. And so the slide that we have today, I'll just briefly summarize, includes some of the feedback that we heard, which was to involve community-based organizations in community participation early on in the process, to integrate equity in multiple places in the program guidelines, to prioritize community visions before planning a project, to keep it simple, and to add community support as a criteria. And before I move on to the next slide, I will give Kayla an opportunity. I see the little symbol that tells me there might be a comment or a raised hand.
Thanks, Matthew. Yes, can you elaborate on the bullet point for integrate equity in multiple places? Does this mean like in the application, the guidelines, or the project design or scope?
No, that is a great question. I believe during the workshop, we asked stakeholders, or I should say attendees of the workshop, where they could see equity being better integrated in the program guidelines. And so it was the feedback we received was that it should be integrated in multiple places in the program guidelines, meaning not just in a standalone evaluation criteria, if that's the direction that the Commission takes on updating the guidelines, but in existing evaluation criteria, if feasible, and throughout other sections of the existing guidelines. But that would obviously translate to the project submittals, the nominations, to respond to evaluation criteria based on how we incorporate this specific concept.
Thanks, Matthew. We do have a hand raised, so I'll turn it to Celeste.
Thanks, Kayla. Yes, Zoe Unra, I've unmuted you. Oh, Zoe. She put her hand down, so that might have been
Zoe, if you are having issues with your audio or whatnot, you please feel free to drop a comment in the questions function, and I can make sure to address it.
No more questions or hands raised at the moment, Matthew.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Kayla. Let's move on to the next slide to close out the recap. So this slide shows some of the noted challenges that we heard and captured from attendees in the workshop, which were the following. That there are funding constraints to properly address the depth of these issues, that localizing equity indicators within a region can be a challenge, that there's a lack of historical data for rural or small communities in this area, that there's an inability to fund community-based organization participation in the process, an overall concern obtaining political and general support around this idea or around maybe the localized efforts where the projects come from, that suburbs and rural areas inability to compete with urban areas in the process, and a duplication of efforts by multiple agencies in the same geographic area. So I'll just say that while these areas were vocalized as possible challenges by attendees, and we're kind of recapping them for you now, we are still exploring ways to address them. And I want to say that these challenges will not necessarily prevent us from exploring the extent to which we can better incorporate equitable outcomes in the SB1 programs this cycle. So if anything, this is meant as a recap, and we certainly acknowledge the validity of these challenges, but it's our attempt to work through some of these where we can this cycle. So the specific feedback that we received will be considered and synthesized into appropriate changes, specific changes to the guidelines in each of the SB1 programs, which we'll be sharing publicly later this spring. And I'll go ahead and say, I was encouraged by the attendance, and we were encouraged by the attendance that we had at the December 16th workshop, as well as the feedback that we received during the workshop. And I strongly encourage our stakeholders to continue following along with these efforts as we proceed with draft guidelines in each of the SB1 programs. So the next opportunity to discuss the incorporation of transportation equity in the SB1 competitive programs will be during the February 3rd Equity Advisory Roundtable discussion. And we're also tentatively planning to bring a second standalone all SB1 competitive program workshop on better integrating transportation equity following the February 3rd roundtable. So right now we're tentatively looking at March, give or take a few weeks, depending on other commission workshops and the commission meeting we have that month as well. So with that, unless there are additional comments or questions, I'll ask Kayla to let me know. I will turn the presentation back over to Naveen.
Hi, Matthew. No questions or comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. Back to you,
All
Naveen.
Right. Thanks, Matthew, for that recap. This concludes the recap segment of today's workshop. I know that was a lot, so if you did have any questions about any of the slides on the recap right now, feel free to put a comment in the comment box or raise your hand, and we'll be more than happy to respond to any questions. Of course, if you think of something later down the road towards the end of the workshop, let us know then too. That is why we're here. Okay, so moving on. In today's workshop, we will focus on evaluation criteria, specifically efficient land use, which will serve as a conclusion to our discussion from November's workshop. We will also discuss the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, and the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, environmental clearance timeline, which will serve as a conclusion to our discussion from the September and October workshops. And lastly, we will address office hours, 2022 workshops, and key topics for subsequent workshops. In the navigational bar on the right in GoToWebinar, reference documents are included as handouts for your convenience, and you can also find these on the workshop webpage on the Commission's website. Reference documents include the workshop agenda, the 2020 SCCP guidelines, and Supplement B discussion draft. Kayla, are there any questions or comments right now for us to address before I move on?
Hi, Naveen. We do have one just going back to the equity topic.
Sure.
Just to clarify, is our next equity roundtable on February 3rd?
Yes, that's the equity advisory roundtable. The all SB1 competitive equity workshop has not yet been scheduled, and once that is scheduled, we will send an email out to all stakeholders. Does that clarify, Paul?
I think that
I'll say maybe the date February 3rd is still up in the air, so forgive me. I probably should have just said February, but I do believe our planning team is still coordinating on getting those materials out to the public. So please forgive me because I am now referring to our roundtable portion of the website, and I'm not seeing it posted. So understand that yes, we will have an equity advisory roundtable in February, but please wipe that it would be on the 3rd from your memory and wait until the planning team announces that.
Thanks, Matthew. Naveen, it looks like Paul raised his hand, so I'll turn it to Celeste.
Thanks, Kayla. Paul.
Never mind. I think we answered Paul's question.
Okay, great. Well, Paul, if you are confused about anything later on or anything, just let us know. We can definitely clarify.
Actually, we're making news as we progress. I'm getting straight from our Associate Deputy Director of Equity and Engagement, Sequoia Erasmus, confirmed that yes, we will be having and conducting an equity advisory roundtable on February 3rd. So you can re-memorize that and save the date. Materials will be sent out to our CTC distribution list shortly.
It looks like Paul's hand is up again. Oh, never mind. I think that we answered his question now, so there's no more questions or comments.
Kayla, Paul put his hand back up.
Okay.
Okay,
go ahead, Celeste.
I'm sorry, everybody. This is just a bit of back and forth, and I appreciate it. And I just wanted to make sure that I heard something about February 3, and I need to make sure that I get on the necessary email list. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, of course, Paul. I'll follow up with you and Doug Remedios, who has ownership of the greater CTC distribution list, and we'll make sure that your contact information gets added to it. But I won't tell you specifically what time of day I believe the February 3rd roundtable will be, because I believe we have had them in the afternoon as well as the morning. So stay tuned for that specific detail.
And that's all we have for the hands raised.
Okay, and now that we have sufficiently confused you, we are ready to move on to the first item on the agenda. Okay, so next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier today, we will conclude our discussion on integrating pro-housing related principles into the SCCP's efficient land use evaluation criterion. For reference, this is in section 16.2 on page 10 of the 2020 SCCP guidelines. So Commission staff worked with the California Department of Housing and Community Development to develop the proposed changes to the guidelines, which you can see on this next slide right here, and in the reference document titled Supplement B Discussion Draft. If we can move to the next slide, Kayla. So these are the proposed changes. To make it easy to read on the slide, I have removed the stricken portions that are currently visible in Supplement B. I will not read aloud all the text that you can see here. I could bore you that way and do that, but I would prefer not to. However, I will note that while the changes may look significant, the integrity and intent of the original content remains. The integration of pro-housing policies into the efficient land use criterion will enable applicants to access a broader range of options to help satisfy this particular requirement. Specifically, applicants can demonstrate that a proposed project will support and advance transportation efficient land use by either identifying local government jurisdictions that will be served by the proposed project and have obtained or applied for the pro-housing designation from the California Department of Housing and Community Development, or they may also satisfy the requirement by identifying established or developing local land use policies in the project area which support efficient land use patterns and or incorporate pro-housing criteria identified in the updated land use efficiency and pro-housing supplement. So for this particular workshop, we are specifically focused on the changes to the guidelines language itself. However, on this next slide, I'm going to share a few of the changes that you will see in the land use efficiency and pro-housing supplement. As you can see, we've added on and pro-housing into the title of the supplement itself as well. So again, the land use efficiency and pro-housing supplement is a resource document developed to assist applicants to prepare their project nominations. We will post the changes to the supplement after this workshop, but didn't want to confuse the discussion today. So for your reference, the main changes to this particular supplement will include the incorporation of specific pro-housing policies and assistance as an option to meet the efficient land use evaluation criterion, minor updates to the type of narrative that can be provided if applicants choose to utilize land use indicators previously identified in the 2020 SCCP land use efficiency supplement, and updates to other available resources, including additional available grants. So I did cover a little bit there. I assume people have questions or comments of some sort, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kayla.
Hi, Naveen. No questions at the moment, but I see a hand raised, so I'll turn it to Celeste.
Sure.
Thank you, Kayla. Marina Espinoza, you've been unmuted.
Hi, good afternoon. Marina Espinoza here on behalf of the California State Association of Counties. Thank you so much for sharing that proposed language. And just wanted to share that the proposed language is acceptable to CSAC except for item number 1 in the 3rd paragraph. The pro-housing designation program is still operating under emergency regulations, and we think it's premature to incorporate that language under number 1 in the 3rd paragraph into the Solutions for Congested Corridors guidelines at this time. We would suggest instead starting with the programs explicitly listed in the authorizing legislation, which was AB 101, and the SCCP is not listed as part of that. And more broadly, CSAC is concerned that the emergency pro-housing regulations require direct financial subsidies of affordable housing projects to obtain the designation. And with that, accordingly, directly incorporating the pro-housing designation will disadvantage counties with limited budgets, lower tax bases, and higher poverty when they apply for the grants. Thank you so much for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you so much for your comment. I believe this comment was shared in our previous workshop when Josh Rosa was kind enough to do a presentation of the new pro-housing designation program. So I think I should clarify one more time. We're adding, so the item that you see in the 2nd bullet, mark number 1, that is an option that is added on to the land use efficiency criterion. We are not requiring that you only have pro-housing designation obtained or applied for in order to qualify for the requirements for the land use efficiency criterion. So it is in addition to what was already available in the 2020 SCCP guidelines. So it's an option for those, I guess, applicants who want to utilize that option, but it is by no means the only option that is available or required at this time. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, please let me know. Feel free to raise your hand or offer an additional comment. Kayla, Celeste, are there any additional comments or questions?
Hi, Naveen. Yes, there's one more raised hand. Kiana Valentine, you're unmuted.
Good afternoon, Kiana Valentine, Executive Director for Transportation California. Wanted to echo the comments made by Marina with the California State Association of Counties. I do appreciate the clarification that it is additive, that it's either or. At the same time, the transportation construction industry still needs to go on record with our concerns about the integration of the pro-housing program from our perspective, it's early stages into SB1 programs where it's not statutorily combined or required, sorry. We have provided this feedback in the context of the Commission's other SB1 competitive grant programs. I'd say in addition to the points made by CSAC, we would like to also add to the fact that, SB1 requires motorists and to pay various taxes and fees, whether it's at the pump or at the time of their vehicle registration. And SB1 was upheld by the voters with the rejection of Proposition 6 in 2008. And one of the critical reasons from our work on that campaign that Prop 6 was defeated was that every single community, every city, every county benefits from SB1, and that individuals who pay into the system need to see benefits from their tax investments back to them. So I think anything that constrains the ability of a jurisdiction to competitively apply for these funds is an additional concern of ours. So thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate the efforts you guys are making to try to weave all of these various things into the program.
Sure. Thank you so much for your comment, Kiana.
Naveen, that concludes our raised hands, and I'll let Kayla take it over.
Hi, Naveen. We do have one written question at the moment. This is from Rachel Moricone. If a project goes through multiple jurisdictions, but only half the cities or counties meet number 1 or number 2 for pro-housing, would a project not be scored as highly?
That is a really great question, and we do address it in some of the proposed changes to the land use efficiency and pro-housing supplement. I would like to see if Josh Rosa is still on the line and able to answer that question, because he put it very eloquently when we did have this discussion. Josh, are you still able to join us?
I think so.
Hey.
I'm on? Okay, great.
Yes, sir.
I apologize if Kayla, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure, Josh. So the question is, if a project goes through multiple jurisdictions, but only half the cities or counties meet number 1 or number 2 for pro-housing, would a project not be scored as highly?
I think the approach that we've discussed with CTC taking is the same approach reflected in the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, which adopted final guidelines several months ago, and TIRCP includes additional points and incentives for pro-housing communities. It focuses on the local government jurisdictions that are served by the project. And that phrase, like served by the project, is really the operative phrase. It basically means that if a credible case is made that a given community is being served by the project from a travel demand standpoint or a congestion management standpoint, obviously, then that's the jurisdiction that we would look at in terms of their housing supportive policies or their participation in pro-housing, whether they've obtained the pro-housing designation or merely applied for it. If there's more than one such community linked to the same project nomination, even better, but it wouldn't put a project nomination at any disadvantage if they only have one. In fact, having one would be a good thing if they can make the case that community served by the project is participating in pro-housing. I hope that sheds some light on the question, but happy to further discuss it.
And I will add to what Josh was saying, in SCCP, we don't score projects. They're simply prioritized based on how they perform on the criterion that are provided. So it wouldn't be like we would be scoring you or ranking you higher or lower. It would just be based on the prioritization of what criteria you meet and what criteria you do not meet, if that makes any sense. I hope that answers your question, Rachel. If it doesn't, by all means, you can come off mute or raise your hand and you can come off mute and we can address it further. But I don't see anybody's hands raised. So any other questions, Kayla, in the comment section?
Hi, Naveen. We just received one more.
Okay.
This is from Sarkis Kachek. They asked, will projects be evaluated with a high, medium, or low for this section?
I'm not sure how to answer that. Matthew, are you available to maybe respond to that question?
Yes, the answer is yes. That the efficient land use and housing, now the land use efficiency and pro-housing criteria will be similar to the other evaluation criteria. So when Naveen says they're not scored, it's not, there are not specific point values necessarily, like you get 2 points for getting this, 4 points for getting this out of 10. But yes, this criteria is evaluated similar to other evaluation criteria, which is low through high.
Hi, Naveen. I'm not seeing any more questions and no hands raised at the moment.
Awesome. Thank you, Matthew and Josh, for helping to answer the questions. If people do have any other questions regarding this particular evaluation criterion and the discussion we just had, feel free to chime in later on. But I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide, which is on funding restrictions. So previously, we discussed potential changes to environmental clearance requirements found under funding restrictions. For reference, this is section 7 on page 3 of the 2020 SCCP guidelines. Specifically, the potential change would have required that CEQA and NEPA clearance be completed before program adoption. Based on the feedback we received on this proposal, consensus indicated support for staying the course with the existing requirements. Some commenters expressed that changes may limit different projects from competing for funding. So keeping these recommendations in mind, if we can move to the next slide, we are instead proposing a minor adjustment to this requirement for the 2022 program. As demonstrated on this slide, we have added clarifying language which specifies that both CEQA and NEPA clearance must be completed within 6 months of program adoption. And you can see that change in the yellow or gold font depending on your audiovisual issues or on your capabilities on your computer. So if anyone has any questions or comments about this proposed change, please go ahead and raise your hand or comment in the questions box. Kayla, do you see anything so far?
Hi, Naveen. No written questions and no raised hands right now.
Okay. Alrighty. So I will go ahead and move on to the next slide then. But again, if you do have any questions or comments about any of the proposed changes or recommendations, just feel free to comment or raise your hand and we'll be happy to go back to whichever slide you would like to return to. Okay, so we are happy to announce that we are now scheduling appointments with agencies that would like to consult one-on-one with Commission staff. These private sessions will allow agencies to ask us questions about the application process and program guidelines as they apply to their projects. Up to 9 hours will be available in total each month, and all appointments will be scheduled on a first-come, first-served basis. To request an appointment, please follow the link provided here to an online form. And after you have completed and submitted the form, Commission staff will review your request and contact you to get your appointment scheduled. This information has been emailed to our stakeholders, and we have also posted it on the Commission's website on the SCCP webpage. Kayla, do you see any questions or comments at this time?
Hi, Naveen. No questions or hands raised at the moment.
Okay, then I will move on to the next slide. So the 2022 SCCP workshop schedule has been announced and workshops are scheduled through April. The official save the date flyer is linked here, but is also available online on the Commission's website. Please remember to place holds on your calendars for these upcoming workshops. We wouldn't want you to miss any of them. And moving on to the next slide. In those upcoming 2022 workshops, we do plan to discuss Cycle 3 and funding, integration of equity, performance metrics guidebook, project nominations, and timely use of funds. But do note that while we do have key topics listed here, we reserve the right to add topics to this list. And if we choose to do so, they will be noted on workshop agendas well in advance of that respective workshop. Kayla, any questions or comments?
Hi, Naveen. None at the moment.
Alrighty, then moving on to the next slide. So to recap, today we reviewed and engaged in a discussion about efficient land use and pro-housing criteria, and we concluded the discussion on CEQA and NEPA as well. We did cover a robust recap of everything that we have come to a consensus on so far and any of the outstanding items we've discussed. There are no pertinent resulting action items from this meeting, but if you do have any questions or comments that you think of later or after the meeting, please feel free to contact us. We will be posting the workshop recording and this presentation and the land use efficiency and pro-housing supplement changes to the Commission's website after the workshop, so be on the lookout for that. I do see that there is a comment, Kayla, from Rachel again. Can you go ahead and read that for us?
Yeah, sure. They asked, is there a consolidated summary document of all the current proposed changes?
So we do have one that we have worked on, Rachel, but to avoid overwhelming the discussion, we have not shared the consolidated summary document as of yet. What I can do is take all the different portions that we have come to a conclusion on, discussion for, put them in one document, so it's just one big supplement that you can see all the proposed changes in. Would that be helpful, or would you are you referring to maybe like a track changes on the existing guidelines so you can see all the different changes that we have discussed so far in the guideline process?
Okay. Rachel said that would be okay. Yeah, you saw her comment.
I definitely did. Okay, so I can definitely have a discussion with my executive team and see if we can put together that document and post it online for everybody's convenience. Any other comments or questions right now, Kayla?
So one more question came in from Phil Hobeck. Is there a timeline for when the announcement of if the cycle will be 2 or 4 years?
Yes, we have received this comment consecutively for the last 2 workshops, and we do understand that there are some time limitations with submitting nominations to Caltrans, I think, or working with Caltrans on the project nominations. I believe Matthew answered them the last 2 times, so I'm going to allow him to take it away this time.
Yeah, thanks, Naveen, and you answered it very well. So I'll just say right now, we're planning for a 2-year program period for the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. The reason we haven't locked that down is because we still have a couple workshops ahead of us where you know, we still have some time before the guidelines are adopted, I would say. So unless there's a prevailing reason to not proceed with a 2-year program period, please consider that this will be a 2-year program period in cycle 3 with $500 million in available funding. I do understand that Caltrans has a deadline for their own prioritization on co-sponsorship on applications for the Congested Corridors program, and I believe their deadline is February 1st. So if you are planning to submit projects for consideration through Caltrans, please treat the Solutions for Congested Corridors program as a 2-year program.
That's it for questions and comments, Naveen.
Thank you, Kayla, and thank you, Matthew, for again answering that question so well and so thoroughly. Okay, so on this slide, if you give me 1 second, sorry, I'm having a quick technical difficulty. Okay, sorry about that. I think I just muted and unmuted and something went glitchy on my end. So, okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and do a last call for any questions or comments before I move into my final kind of closing housekeeping items. Kayla, anything else?
Hi, Naveen. We do have one more. This is from Zoe Unra. Would you be able to recap the schedule for guidelines adoption, call for projects, and submittal timeline?
I would be. They are available online. I don't currently have the timeline in front of me, but we do have it listed in our previous workshop presentations. I'm going to try to pull it up real quick so that I have it in front of me so I don't quote the wrong items to you. But I do believe adoption was supposed to be in summer of 2022, so that's later this year. And then call for projects was going to be fall and winter of 2022. And that would follow the submittal timeline as well. Matthew, is that correct?
I know we're getting really close now, or closer than we were, and I'll make sure that we're crystal clear about this in our next workshop. So we're bringing draft guidelines to the commission at the June 2022 commission meeting. So that's in about 6 months, you'll see draft guidelines to the commission, and then we'll adopt final guidelines at the August 2022 commission meeting. When we adopt guidelines, that will initiate the call for projects. So assume that the window will be open to submit applications starting with the August commission meeting this year. We are not quite sure yet, only because we're still working with some of our partners who will assist us on evaluating applications when we will ask for congested corridors applications to be due. But in the past, I believe it's been roughly 3 months. So we're right now aiming to ask applicants to have congested corridors nominations to us by November 2022 or December 2022 at the absolute latest. And again, the reason we can't confirm that yet is because we're still working with other agencies that will assist us in evaluation. So like Housing and Community Development on the land use criteria, Air Resources Board on the air quality criteria, and our own evaluation process as well. We are planning to adopt the program at the June 2023 commission meeting. So that would be immediately before the program period would actually begin. So that will put us in front of when the funding is available, I believe for the first time since SB1 was created. And so the timeline that I just described is going to be the same for the local partnership program and the trade corridor enhancement program, give or take a few weeks when we might ask for applications to be due. So granted, I know that that's probably the big deadline that you all are interested in, are those of you that will be submitting applications, and that's understandable. So just tentatively plan to submit them in November or December 2022, and we'll be making sure to put that date out certainly before draft guidelines are posted in the coming month or two. But I hope that clarifies. I know that that's ideally would have been something we would have made available earlier on in the process. So apologies that we still haven't confirmed the due date.
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, so I think I don't see any additional comments. Kayla, do you have any on your end?
Hi, Naveen. No, I'm not seeing any written questions and no hands raised at the moment.
So I do notice that we have a little bit of time left in our workshop, 2 hours worth, 2 hours and 10 minutes worth of it. So if you do have any questions or comments, happy to give folks a minute to type them in or raise their hand before I move on with the final housekeeping announcements. I do see a hand raised.
Thank you, Naveen. Zoe Unruh. Zoe, you're self-muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, I know it's kind of coming up, but I know at the outset of these workshops, there was a discussion to revisit the performance metrics, and I see that it is upcoming. The process that was done for cycle 2 existed a little bit outside of the individual program guideline process and was done kind of separately, and not just housed within SCCP discussions. So I'm wondering if that is going to be part of the process again, or if we're going to be just taking more of a program specific look at those criteria.
Hey, Zoe, I think I can address that question, and that's a very good question. I want to say when we first introduced the concept of a performance metrics guidebook back with the August kickoff, we had described a process by which Hannah Walter, who's the program manager for the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, had taken on a several months long effort with a working group to create a performance metrics guidebook, which was informed by various regions and experts in the field. And so we actually have a draft version of the performance metrics guidebook already created, which will be utilized by the Solutions for Congested Corridors program, the Local Partnership program, and the Trade Corridor Enhancement program. Now that guidebook specifies which metrics are to be completed for which program nominations. But if you'll have to forgive me, I can't remember who LA Metro's representative on the working group was, but if you'd like a copy of the draft guidebook, that's something I can share. I know Hannah has already shared it, but it's something we will be presenting at I believe at the February SCCP workshop, and Naveen, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But it will be presented at each program specifically, but the guidebook and the performance metrics are going to be the same. Now, obviously, we'll ask for slightly different criteria or different metrics by program. Like we won't be asking for freight metrics in the Congested Corridors program, but I suppose to answer your question, which was, are we going to be like kind of fleshing that out in the Solutions for Congested Corridors workshops themselves? The answer to that question is no. We've already taken on a significant effort to inform the guidebook, and we'll be kind of presenting the guidebook at a Congested Corridors workshop and answering any questions accordingly. And certainly we can be available to answer questions along those lines through the call for projects. So I hope that answers your question, because I know that if you were unfamiliar, that might seem like a pretty daunting task to have to take on yet in the Congested Corridors workshops, but that has been an ongoing process, and we at the Commission are very confident we've landed at a very useful tool that provides, and points to existing resources and commonly identified metrics to be identified and calculated for consideration in this program. So I can assure you that we are not intending to be asking for anything that would be out of nowhere or would seem unreasonable based on what we've already asked for in this program. So we had utilized where we landed in cycle 2 as the foundation for what we have now.
Oh, great. Yeah, it would be helpful to see if there's been what the deviation has been from cycle 2.
Of course, yeah. So I'll connect with Hannah and we can make sure we get that sent over.
Thanks, Matthew. And thanks for the question, Zoe. Appreciate that. Any other questions or comments, Kayla?
Hi, Naveen. No written questions at the moment, and I'm not seeing any more hands raised.
Okay, so just final housekeeping. For the latest commission news and updates, you can visit our website and follow us on social media. If you have any general questions or comments, you can always email us at ctc@catc.ca.gov. Lots of C's and A's and C's there. But on this next slide, you can also see that for specific inquiries regarding our program or SB1 programming generally, you can contact us individually using the information provided here. We always try to do our best to respond as quickly and as soon as possible. So feel free to email us any questions that you may have. I do know that we went through some big changes today. So if you do think of any questions or comments after the conclusion of the workshop, again, you can email us at those email addresses and share your thoughts with us. We will record your comments and definitely take them into consideration. And I think that is it for today. So unless there are any other questions or comments, Kayla, final call, I guess.
Hi, Naveen. Doesn't look like we have anything outstanding.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today, including our planning team, Josh Rosa, our esteemed Deputy Director, Matthew Yoscott, who answered all the questions so beautifully and accurately. And thank you all for joining us today, and we appreciated the constructive and informative discussion and feedback from all of you. And we look forward to seeing you all at the next workshop. Have a great afternoon and the rest of your week.